Biomutant has been in the works for the past 5 years, an ambitious game made by a studio of over 20 people. It was one of the most anticipated games of 2021, and it is finally here. Before we jump right into the review, do have some little considerations in mind while you watch. This is not a AAA game, but I'm going to treat it like if it was, because you're still being charged $60 for it, so it doesn't get a free pass in anything just by being a game of somewhat an indie layer. That being said, let's talk about graphics first. The overall graphical presentation, when you look at the full package, when you're just roaming around the world, the thing is damn beautiful and gorgeous. The world is such a beautiful place to be wondering about, and it is not only green what you'll see around. There's a bunch of different biomes that I'm not gonna spoil for you in this review. More than the biomes, the overall versatility of art direction of the places you visit. You have plain open fields, forests, abandoned cities, and so on. However, the more time you spend with the game, the ugly becomes more present and noticeable. Foliage looks artificial as hell. In some instances they use 2D pixelated sprites to take care of the overgrowth foliage, low detail textures everywhere, and foliage again popping out of the ground without any care of painting textures depending on the foliage growth that you are. Characters lose so much of their charm, especially those that are moving while you look at them, because you can plainly see how the textures stretch in their bodies. They do not look like handcrafted and carrying models with rigs, but just a plastic thing that was painted, and on top of that, the painting stretches with it. Buildings and polygons look dull and non-immersive. Mountains seems to be made of cardboard, and when you get close to them, the draw distance is handled by a really low detail blur that really becomes more and more uglier when you're in conversations or combat, since they place this point of view sphere on top of you and beyond it without any kind of degrading. They pump up this blur that in my very own eyes leaves way too much to be desired. Like I said, the thing can look damn gorgeous, beautiful when you're just out there enjoying the vistas, but the very moment that you start paying attention, when you start exploring and looking for those little spots that you need to be looking at for that precious loot, that's when the more noticeable how lacking every single individual aspect of the game looks like. Let's move on to sound.
The Jagni tribe wants to become omnipresent and, most importantly, feared. They want to vanquish the tribes, as the only way they can guarantee peace is through supremacy. The Sifu is determined to let the World Eaters destroy the Tree of Life, as it's part of their strategy to cleanse the world and start a new...
Again, nothing really special, and even more than that, dude, while it nails at some extent some of the little things like environmental sounds, soundtrack, which is pretty damn beautiful, and the voice acting of the narrator, that is actually quite well done. There's some other things around here and there that they are not well implemented, and they really hurt the experience. The main narrator voice acting, like I said, is on point, and at times it's even pleasing to hear. But when you're playing the game where you can squeeze even more than 50 hours and you're listening to him all the time, you get tired sooner than later. Also, combat sound, it's all over the place, and it's even hideous, dude. That's a personal statement. But dude, those broken hitboxes, which I'm gonna talk about them a little later in the video, do not help at all the fact that when you're fighting, all you hear are random sword slashes that don't make any kind of sense on how, and when you're hitting the enemy also, the enemies not staggering with the hits makes the combat feel damn artificial and without any kind of punch on the hits. When you start summing up all these little aspects, the quality you're expecting as a consumer becomes more and more lacking when you're paying a full price tag game. Let's talk about the narrative since it's tied up a little bit to the sound. You're in a post-apocalyptic world, your mother was one of the greatest martial art fighters of said world, and it is up to you to restore the world 3 or destroy it. The overall game narrative is built in a black and white, which is also a mechanic. Depending on your decisions and dialogue choices, you're gonna either get a black or white aura, which will also alter the ending you get. There is one major aspect as to why the main story plot is so forgettable, as well as the characters, and that is the choice of having just one voice through the course of the entire game. While it's a bold and charming at some extent, it hurts the narrative experience since you're taking away the chance of each individual character to stand out, something that visually they do. NPC models are silly, cool, charming, but not having a voice to distinguish themselves takes away any kind of protagonism they might have. They do have their very own alien voices that the main narrator translates them for you, but at the end of the day, it's still the very same voice, the one that stands out when someone's telling you something important. This reminds me a lot of games like Banjo-Kazooie, and if you ask for my personal opinion, I truly think it would have been a whole better idea to have those alien voices on top of the dialogue so that at least they emulate that kind of silly language and you remember those characters for those voices, like Gruntilda from Banjo-Kazooie, for example. For the sake of being neutral and experiencing the whole thing to give it a review, I had to go through the whole dialogue, but let me tell you, I didn't want to. I just wanted to skip through the thing, and for me, for a game to cause that on me, it's really damn hard, man. Moving on to gameplay, mechanics, world exploration, combat, and all that great stuff we love from RPGs. First, let's talk about the combat. You choose a class from the roster that the game has to offer to you, but the main thing is what we already know in RPGs. Melee, magic, and ranged classes. You can mix and match them to build a melee gunslinger or spellblader and so on and so forth. Character creation is their very own thing that is quite cunning. Strength is gonna let you look like this beefy guy, and intelligence is gonna give you a bigger head. After that, you change the color, the fur, and you're ready to go. Biomutant drinks from combat systems like the famous Batman Arkham with that reaction, parry, and dodging combat system that surrounds you of enemies that you counter based on the little icons above their heads. The icons of alerts and biomutants and enemies fade on the contrast of whites of the game, and you hardly even notice when someone's going to attack you. Also, there is no cancel attack animation in Biomutant. You perform an attack or a combo and you have to commit to it, which takes away that reaction timing and dodging and parrying. Humongous problem, dude. Nearly makes the melee unbearable. We're so accustomed to reaction and responding combat systems that makes Biomutant feel clunky, since you cannot make that cancel attack animation to dodge or parry. You have to change your mindset to predict enemy attacks instead of react to them, and I personally don't think that's how this kind of combat systems should be working. That being said, you're better off getting a nice gun to play with and ignore the melee combat completely for the very first half of the game when you're gearing up, since later stages of the game in like 15 level plus the overall build that you have for your weapons makes more present the RPG elements, and you have the power through you just have the power through enemy attacks and unleash havoc on your overpowered weapons and gear. But the combat system on itself, on its bare bones, not it. It's not balanced nor functional. Sometimes even hitboxes don't register any kind of damage, and that is also true both for you and for the enemies. Pair that up with the lacking sound of proper slashes and enemies not staggering on hits, and it gives you a game that is really painful to bear in the early stages of the game. Like I said, as you progress, you get better gear and stop noticing this, but the combat system on its bare bones should work, dude. Also, there's no focus lock on enemies mechanic, and while I didn't mind it that much, later on when I started to get skills, I realized how big of a mistake this was, because you're never allowed to throw a skill to a specific enemy. The game does it for you. Let's say, for example, that you want to stomp on that annoying rifleman shooting you while you try to fight the miniboss. Oh no, compadre, your character is gonna attack whoever the hell he wants to. He is not going to do what you want him to do. Now to exploration and mechanics. You're thrown into a world and your main side activities will be to explore, gather resources to get better gear, and even craft gear in one of the most pleasing, simplistic, and complicated crafting systems that you're gonna find out there. Let me explain. At very first stages of the game, you're not gonna get that much of amazing stuff to play around with, and the resources icons, what they are really damn confusing, and the fact that the game is throwing you tutorials and tutorials and tutorials of the menus of everything, it tires you enough not to want to understand it at first instance. But when you get the hang of it, dude, You feel like in Fallout, exploring those abandoned places to get gear pieces, mods for your weapons, crafting resources, and that's when you start to craft your ridiculously overpowered weapons that make the combat that much more enjoyable because you're a force of havoc. Now there's a huge disparity on opinions out there about this game. There's people that loves it, there's people that don't. I would like to remind you that a proper review is not someone trying to convince you to like or dislike a game. And if they're doing so, that is not a review, dude. A review is a critical analysis to showcase the consumer what he's going to be paying for. I always try to break down the game as best as I can so that you and only you make your very own judgment about the game and if you're willing to spend your money on it. And at the end of the video I add my personal opinions, my bias and recommendations in case you're interested in those. Graphically speaking, if you don't look too close to it, the game can look damn gorgeous but hideous when you notice those little details. Yes, I know it's made by 20 people and there's only so much they can do about a game of this scope, but man, can we stop making this romantic idea of supporting developers just because they're a group of small people? I stand by the philosophy, dude, that the support has to happen sideways. Let's say for example that a painter starts selling art and you want to support it, but thinks them ugly and you're just gonna buy it to have it stored in some old closet, not to properly display it in your house. I'm not saying Biomutant is a bad game, but as you can see, dude, it's lacking way so many aspects in graphics, sound, narrative and combat, the latter being the most affected in my opinion, since a functional balanced combat system can very well make you ignore every single little other aspect to keep you having fun. To me, Biomutant feels like an old game, and I don't mean that in a bad sense, but rather in a good one. One of those old games that have so much charm, that you enjoy so much playing, and you don't have the slightest idea as to why you're enjoying it so much. That is how Biomutant has me feeling. I have been playing it non-stop and I feel so immersed in the game, in the world, and just exploring, dude. I just can't stop playing, but I do not recommend Biomutant in this stage. If you wait for a sale, the combat system issues might actually be fixed by them and the game will be so much more enjoyable. Yes, I said that I love the game and I've been having so much fun with it, but it's something very different. For me to recommend a game, it has to be worth functional game of the $60 tag price. Bad audio output, horrible hitboxes that at times don't connect the hits that you or the enemies makes, slow-paced combat system thanks to the inability to cancel attack animations, forgettable story that I personally didn't care for it at all. No, dude, I cannot recommend someone to get the game right now, even if I personally love it. That being said, let me know what you guys think of it so far. Did it manage to keep you playing like it did with me? Tell me your opinions in the comments. Let's talk all about Biomutant. That being said, I'll see you beautiful, sexy, gorgeous people in next one. Stay safe, stay beautiful, and I'll see you later.